Good afternoon, America. Brian James Blem here. I want to welcome you back to another episode of What the Fuck's Up. I want to talk to you about, well, of course, government a little bit more. More particularly government that evolved in the United States over the course of the 20th century, namely beginning in 1913 prior to World War I, which ravaged between 24 and 2018. Right? Because what do we know about the 20th century, folks? The 20th century writ large can be spelled in simply three letters. And those three letters are W-A-R. War. War. The 20th century was a century of world war and international conflict. Whether you talk about World War I, whether you talk about World War II, the intervening Cold War that saw a lot of conflict both in places like Vietnam, as the United States fought for over a decade to try to push back this communist surge happening in Indochina. And you've got the Russians, the Soviet Union, fighting their same little Vietnam known as Afghanistan. And of course, the Soviet Union lost and the United States both lost these conflicts, these small regional conflicts. But you've got conflicts all over the world taking place, El Salvador, Honduras, as the Cold War ravaged until 1991, when the Union Soviet Socialist Republics disbanded and the Warsaw Pact, the USSR and Eastern Europe's version of NATO, disbanded. At that point in time, the Cold War ended. The national security state found itself floundering because what had happened during the Cold War? Well, the United States had intervened in all of these countries around the world, imposing dictatorships. Just look at Augusto Pinochet in Chile. Yeah, he did some good things by bringing the Chicago boys down, those economists from the University of Chicago, who really ramped up their economy, got them on a strong capitalistic foothold. But General Pinochet was not a nice man. He would take suspected guerrillas up in the air and throw them out of helicopters if they wouldn't talk. And then he would throw them out afterwards if they did, in fact, talk. But you've got the rise of the desaparecidos all over Latin America. Just people disappeared by their government and by the people they were fighting because of their beliefs and their thought processes. So the 20th century, folks, is a century of war, a century of conflict around the world. We successfully avoided nuclear war with the Union Soviet Socialist Republics, even though technically we waged nuclear war on Japan and World War II. And so this era was an era characterized by conflict and bloodshed. And I got to tell you, that's exactly what these people in the national security state are still pushing. If you look at the McCain Institute, it talks about, how do we fight a new era of Cold War, right? They want war. The war hawks want war because war gives the federal government power, a substantial amount of power. And so what I really want to talk about today is how we rein in that federal government's penchant for war, how we rein in its bloodlust, right? Because the military-industrial complex here, folks, it makes a shit ton of money off of war. It makes a lot of money off the United States federal government sending the sons and daughters of the United States, the husbands and wives of the United States, to die in foreign wars. It makes a lot of money when the government of El Salvador fights the communists, when the Contras fight the Sandinistas and whatever's taking place around the world. This is money, folks, and money is power for these huge corporate interests. And what we have seen emerge more recently in the early 21st century, it started in the 20th, as this world organization begins to try to seize power over the entire globe through the WHO, the World Health Organization, is the tremendous emergence of the health industrial complex that works in tandem with the military industrial complex and our financial and banking institutions to develop not only weapons of war, but to develop new vaccines. The COVID vaccine was not a vaccine, it's a gene therapy. It does not meet the traditional definition of vaccine, and that's why you're seeing so many problems with this mRNA technology, because it was never tested and it could not have gotten past the approval process but for this national or international health emergency that emerged just before the 2020 election, right? So when push comes to shove, folks, it's all about money, right? So how does it work for you, the little person? You, like me, the little person who goes to a job 9 to 5, you get your hourly rate or your salary, whatever the case may be. This is exactly how it works, and this is when the war problems for the United States of America began. 1913. Two things happen in 1913 that give the United States federal government a substantial amount of power and far more control over the states. And one of those is the 16th Amendment. The 16th Amendment, of course, is the income tax. Right? The federal government, prior to the enactment of the 16th Amendment, did not have the ability or constitutional authority to impose an income tax on citizens of the United States of America. So we, the people at the time, during this burgeoning progressive movement, decided, let's give a bunch of federal government bureaucrats and members of Congress, who are completely out of control, the power to tax our income, the power to tax our blood, sweat, and tears. And I'm really talking to you little people, and I say little people in the sense that you are small compared to these folks. You are small compared to these folks, and you are small compared to these folks. These folks will always have far more power and influence in the halls of Congress than you ever will, right? But how does this system work, right? The 1913, the 16th Amendment. This gives them the power, the federal government, to take your blood, sweat, and tears. And how do they do it? How do they do it? Let's say you work for employer A. The United States federal government has inserted itself between you and your employer, and it has directed your employer to take money from your check and send it to the federal government prior to paying you for your labor. They get your money first, folks. And then what do? They make it's a sneaky little trick, right? They do this sneaky little trick to get you to like withholding or whatever, right? And so, the real problem with withholding, folks, is it gets you used to a certain income. Right, it gets you have to devise your life around this specific income you get, because they're taking money off the top and sending it to the federal government before they even pay you, right? And so that's one of the problems with it. But the really dirty, low down, sneaky trick is they take more than they should. And they know they take more than they should. They do that on purpose. So early in the next calendar year, they can send you money back, and you're all like, I'm all happy, I'm excited, I got free money, right? That's your money the whole time. right? That, by the way, because of inflation, is worth less than when they took it from you. So that's the way the system works. This gives them a great deal of power and control, and all of that power and control emanates from you, the hard-working men and women of the United States of America, right? And then I've talked in my shows about really what happens to that money, right? A lot of it gets sent out to, as we've learned, these non-governmental organizations where there are no checks and balances, where there are no audits, where there is zero accountability. When Joe Biden's administration was on his way out the door, we've recently learned that it sent to Stacey Abrams affiliated organizations billions of dollars, folks, so that they can pay themselves lavish salaries, buy huge expensive mansions, and live the life you will never live because of this system that they have created. The 13th Amendment, folks. We need to abolish the income tax in the United States of America, and that will then force the federal government to impose different types of taxes and work more closely with states on foreign policies to determine whether or not the United States wants to be as bellicose as it was in the 21st century. So the first thing we need to do is get rid of this, the 16th Amendment. But the second part of that coin, folks, the second part of the problem is what is known as the Fed, for short, the Federal Reserve banking system. Take a guess as to when it was created. Yep. If you said 1913, you are 100% correct. The Fed Act, the Federal Reserve Act, was passed in December of 1913, not long after we imposed the income tax amendment with respect to amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And that is what is a huge power in the United States federal government, folks. It gives them what's called a flexible monetary policy. And by flexible, it means they can just turn on the printing presses and print money whenever they need it, based on an IOU. Our currency used to be based upon the value of gold. It's known as the gold standard. But they went to what is known as a fiat currency. Yes, a fiat currency sucks just as badly as a fiat car. I know, because I've had one. And so fiat currencies are just currencies that have value by decree, by fiat. The government simply says, poof, this is what our currency is worth. It really has no value aside from the fact that we can do this and kick the shit out of most of the rest of the world. That's truly what gives the American dollar its value, right? And that is exactly why the United States of America is so deep in debt. The way government should work, folks, this is the way it should work. Government closest to the people is what the Constitution calls for. It's what the founders believe was the best form of government. We here at the local level can enjoy more true democracy than we can up here. We, the people, are disconnected from this system because we don't have the resources to go to Congress every day and pound our table on their desk and say, we want change. We don't have that power, folks. And with what they're doing to our elections, we have even less. Who has that power? These people have this power. The NGOs, who know all the members of Congress and who send much of that money back in the form of support for direct election, for the first time election, or for re-election of candidates who support this type of system. And so Basically, these people have direct access to Congress. These people obviously have direct access to Congress. And these people have direct access to Congress. We, the people, will never be able to match their power unless we come out in volume in support of President Trump and in support of efforts to eradicate the 16th Amendment and the Federal Reserve System. The next level of government, state, we are far closer to our state capital than we are to Washington, D.C. Our elected representatives are supposed to, theoretically, live within our communities and spend most of their time, if not at the state capitol, within those communities. The state capitol is also within the community of our state. We can call these folks. We bump into them at restaurants when we go have lunch. We know them on a far more personal level than we will ever know members of Congress or anybody working within the federal government. And so fundamental changes need to take place if America is going to rein in this national security state that is working as a ghost government. And I'm going to talk about that because the ghost government has relocated to the state of Arizona, and it is there and omnipotent, and it wants to dictate Arizona policy and Arizona law, especially as it relates to elections. The best way, folks, to rein in this monstrous beast is to cut off its food supply. And the best way to cut off its food supply is to get rid of the income tax and to get rid of the Federal Reserve System, so these 4 or 5 families that control it don't get all of our interest that we pay them for the right to print and borrow our money. And with that, I'm going to say, get off your ass. Stay awake, folks. Do not go back to sleep just because Trump was elected. We need to stay in this fight. The 2026 elections are on now. They are on now. They started last year. So stay in the fight.